slate where it's like, but this is all I have, right? And so I keep making referrals, and I know she has 30 people on her waiting list, but that's all I have. And I know what that feels like, and it doesn't feel good.
Wouldn't Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 depend on your student population?
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so if I'm at a school where every student needs therapeutic services, then my maybe all students are receiving some type of group counseling or something like that, and so that would now be Tier 1 as opposed to Tier 2 or Tier 3. So it's just dependent on your student population and need where you would fit your level of support.
Correct. Yes, that's a perfect example. Everybody get that? So if you're working at Canyon Oaks, which is a school we run, every student there is doing group work. It's a mental health program. They're all getting individual. They're all getting group. That's basically what every student gets there. So their Tier 1 is mental health, right? Absolutely. And so depending on your school, it would definitely, and then if you also put in alternative schools, same thing, right? So it gets a little, and that's why this has to be done by school site. And then ideally we bring it together across the district, because what's going to fit at this high school is not going to fit at yours. Maybe 80% of it will, because similar needs, similar populations, but not all of it. And that kind of goes back to your comment, because the other part about mental health is obviously there's the broad spectrum about what we mean by mental health. And every campus needs to have a positive, as you heard Jackie, a positive learning environment, a safe environment where kids feel emotionally and physically safe and connected, where they can explore their social and emotional needs and develop those, right? And so in general, a whole place that focuses on mentally healthy students and staff is something that every student should receive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be enough. There's still going to be students that even in the most positive climate, they're going to need additional mental health or behavior supports, etc. But again, this is kind of the big shift. Oftentimes we've kind of said, well, yeah, I used to run resource centers on a campus, and so when we first started this work about 8 years ago, it was like, yeah, but everybody has access, everybody can get referred. Well, in reality, that's not a Tier 1. Until we started taking every single 8th grade student through the resource center, and they got evaluated on a biopsychosocial during their 8th grade PE class. Then it started to be a Tier 1, because every student was getting it. See that difference? So I know I'm harping on this a little bit, but it is a shift in this approach. It is evidence-based, and so there's a lot of evidence-based interventions. I know there's a big push academically and behaviorally to do evidence-based interventions. It doesn't mean if we have something that we can pull off SAMHSA's evidence-based interventions website and just plop it in. You have to make sure that it fits with your culture, but the point is here to be thinking through best practices and research and what the field is telling us. Because I can tell you, it's, some of us have our pet topics, or some of us have our pet programs, and I'm not suggesting you throw those out. I'm just suggesting that we find a place for both, okay? Universal screening would be ideal, right? We did a signs of suicide screening at the last high school district. Every single student went through a signs of suicide screening. Then we were able to find the students that were high risk. So we were able to make sure that all the students got the appropriate. That was a huge political uphill battle, right? To get a suicide assessment for every kid. So that's the ideal, but there's other things we can do until we get there. Yeah.
I think there's great fear at the administrative and leadership level around that idea. Not just for what you'll find, but then what do you do about it, right? So again, things that we might do as Tier 2 right now, which we should be doing as Tier 1, right? As a universal to address our whole high school. The political pushback is not to do it because then they'll know, right? And then there's a shoot the messenger kind of like, oh, well, we did this activity or we did this, and now it's the fault of the screening, right? That now we have to do all this stuff, right? So I see that as one of the major political hurdles to moving forward.
I completely agree, and you're right, it is, and I can appreciate that. And part of that just speaks to the cultural work that we have to do, the climate work in advance. It is educating our administrators and our higher ups. It is educating our school board. It is saying just because I ask and you tell me yes doesn't mean I've created a problem, right? And it doesn't mean because I ask and you tell me yes that now we have created something that no one wants to talk about. In my last district, one of the things I did is started to identify students that were victims of human trafficking. That's extremely unpopular, right? I don't want to be a pimping district. I don't want to be, right? And so I had a lot of political pushback, as you can imagine. Well, we got to the point where we got to the school board and it was like, of course we're going to be addressing human trafficking because we don't want this to happen to any of our students. So it was shifting the dialogue from we have to hide this problem to no, we're going to be strong leaders out here. We don't want any student in our classroom struggling with suicidal ideation and us not know about it. We care that much. So some of it's messaging, some of it's political readiness, and so I recognize this is a lot of work lies ahead, but it's not insurmountable, and it's really critical. Okay? It is kind of the professional development, which we're starting today. It's the empowering culture, it's the leadership, it's instruction in curriculum and assessment. So it's all of it coming together. And yet oftentimes, wait, that person's our leader, right? That's our administrators. That's our curriculum office, right? So we isolate and we kind of separate. We've created these silos and we're not bringing it together. Well, that's what MTSS calls for, and that's what we're hoping to do with this initiative with you. So it's not smushing them together, and it's not just renaming it. Okay, we all got that? And all what? Some few. And if you're a tier 3, do you also get tier 1s?
Yes.
Okay. Behavioral mental health supports. My apologies, you should not capitalize. So I have a few minutes that I want to quickly get through these because you're going to have time working with your team, and Molly and Karen and I are going to get a chance to go around and work with you. But I just want to finish these up. So again, it builds a system of support. It's fluid. So we're going to get a chance. Many of you put your interventions down. You're going to get those interventions back. You're going to get a chance to kind of think, is this really all? Is this really few? Is this really some? Now that we're at the point where California's kind of caught up to the field, front line, so much of the work you've been doing, we need to kind of make sure is leveraged. In other words, I know what it's like to be on the front line and have too many kids in need and go home every night because I'm not able to get to every kid. It doesn't feel good. You don't deserve that. Your students don't deserve it, right? So we recognize that. And that's part of why we started this conversation. It's not going to be fixed probably by the end of the semester, right? But I can't tell you when it's going to be fixed, but I can tell you the fact that you're in this conversation is huge. It gives a lot of hope. We recognize that we have a shortage in the educational profession. I think that's the crisis tunity. It's a crisis right now. We're trying to get people in our schools, but right now our schools are not places that oftentimes people are thriving for their own mental health, right? There's a lot of trauma coming in our schools. There's a lot of needs. There's a lot of pressure. You guys on the front line are feeling that. So my hope is that not only will this make a big difference for students, it'll make a big difference for us, which research shows. So that's the other kind of exciting part. Here's kind of the old pyramid. These are some interventions. What they say is if you're doing interventions well, and if you're doing a really solid tier 1, that will serve about 75 to 80% of your students. If that's really solid, then your tier 2s will serve 10 to 25. And the spectrum is so large because it does depend on your population, right? And then at the top, it's 3.5 to 5%. So what we know is that oftentimes, if we were to break down our statistics and all those data points that we've talked about that we even have, we wouldn't necessarily fall in the right range. And just because we do, it doesn't necessarily mean we're doing it correctly. That makes sense. So we know mental health is connected to learning. You guys know this? Go ahead. And then obviously, and you guys know this, that the 3 things that impact behavior: trauma, mental health, and lack of skills. That's why that behavior group is really important, that they're connected to the MTSS conversation. Oftentimes it is trauma. Oftentimes it is a mental health need that they're masking with drugs or other behaviors. And oftentimes it's a lack of skills that student doesn't know how to perform in class with each other, doesn't know how to exist on this campus with new kids, right? It's a lack of skills. So now that we know that those are the 3 areas that research says are where our students are in need and their behavior falls off, that really helps us shape the work that we do and how we do it. And you guys are already ahead of the curve with number 2 especially. So that's also the resource list. I'm happy to send Karen the PowerPoint so you guys can get this. But I also, maybe 1 or 2 questions before we break? Questions? What was surprising? Go
I
ahead.
was saying that this process is looking at challenging the current model that we have, especially when it comes to guidance counselors. I mean, it'd be nice to be able to help somebody deal with depression and anxiety, but we also have presentations and scheduling and recommendation letters and yeah, I don't think we're, of course, the sharpest saw cuts a tree down a lot quicker, right? We're spread so thin, and I'm wondering if we're going back to the model where we need to be more specialized and have more resources, but you mentioned that earlier. That's just.
So how your district decides to do it, there have been districts that have decided to do that, to get more specialized. And there have been districts that have decided to do the opposite, because they look and go, who else can do these presentations? Who else can do this? Does this have to happen? Is it happening forever? Right? And so there's those really critical conversations, because right now our plates are really full. And are they really full, you're gonna like this, Karen, are they really full with the most nutritious, right, food? Are we really maximizing our meal, right? No, not necessarily. Just because education morphs and evolves and people have archaic, carryovers, if you will. Does that make
I
sense?
think there's really some things that we can address, like, why do we charge things for lunch? We have so much money, throwing it in technology and all this other stuff, and sometimes as counselors, I keep burritos and juices and everything in my fridge. I got a ton of kids coming every day. Some kids just come just to put in the backpack for dinner that night.
Right.
And and that's only because their parents who are working 3 jobs trying to live in this area can't get online to do the free reduced lunch meal. We're not thinking, this is a bureaucratic flaw. We shouldn't, if we don't charge for gowns, why do we have to charge for lunch? But just little things like that, I think,
Right.
in
So
the
that
long run would really help.
You're right. So you see a need, and you're questioning how you're currently answering or not meeting that need. That's a perfect example. We can't say that we're going to get food services to waive that, right? But you just ask that question in a systematic way that's not about. The nice thing about MTSS is it brings an objective look on what is happening and what is not happening.
But shouldn't that be a tier 1 food?
And transportation.
I'm sure we all know Maslow, yes. Any other questions? So thank you for that. Any other questions or, yeah?
We're an ADA-based district, so our attendance policy is different. And one of the huge, we're not ADA, excuse me, we're basic aid district, we're not ADA, excuse me. And so one of the big issues that we have is with truancy. And in other districts that are based on ADA, they have school review boards and all of these other things to address truancy issues. And a lot of times, because we are spread so thin, it's easier to just, okay, the kid's not coming to school, that's one less kid I have to worry about. And then, of course, they'll show up sporadically, and then you're trying to do the crisis intervention or whatever. I'm assuming at some level, at some group of conversation, this is being addressed at a district level. Because again, we're basic aid. So truancy and attendance is not a priority in this district as it might be for another district. And of course, that dovetails into a lot of what we're talking about.
So, do you want to answer that? Or?
Well, actually, I wanted to add to it because the truancy actually hides several specific issues that are happening that we don't necessarily know.
That's why I'm bringing it up.
Truancy can hide health issues or mental health issues, physical or
Social
mental,
issues?
or trauma or social issues. So we don't even know because we don't have that student with us to be able to assess their needs.
Right. So yes, and you guys, I know we got a break, but you guys, I know that attendance, we know that's the number 1, that's a tier 1, right? If we're not in our seats, we're not learning, right? And so I absolutely recognize that. I do know that there are some, so I happen to chair this county level and Mr. Serrano is on it. And across the county, there hasn't been a lot of work and support in the area of attendance, and that is shifting. However, how your district decides to do it, what I heard you say, and this is completely accurate, is oftentimes, this is those old paradigms, oftentimes decisions come through business, or they come through parent groups, or they come through, right? So we have a lot of competing pressures for this group or whomever to look at attendance and understand and look at that data and bring it up as a need is a different dialogue. That's a different way to bring this conversation forward and connect it to a coherent system. Does that make sense? So the need is still there. I absolutely recognize it needs to be addressed. I love that all of you understand, you know, how critical it is and imperative. However, I think part of why things haven't gotten addressed in the past, regardless, we could talk about attendance or other things, is the conversations aren't necessarily coming from the student needs or the system gaps. They've been coming from other kind of more of a business model or more of a, you know, interest group. Does that make sense?
Well, and Joni, you do bring up an important topic, and I think Ann Campbell at the county level has been interested and focused on attendance, and also the difference between truancy and school refusal, because those are two different issues that we're encountering, right? I know we have a lot more questions. We do need to get to our group work, so what I'm going to suggest is if you can all hold your thoughts and your questions, and then when we do our debrief, perhaps we can weave some of those questions into it.
And I'll come around.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do right now is Jenny Bratton has some folders for all of our mental health coordinators to take to their groups. They're gonna lead the sticky note exercise. We're gonna keep Menlo Atherton and Carlmont in this room. Maple will have Sequoia and Maple. And we'll have Woodside, Redwood, and ETAA and Mahogany. For those of you who are not attached to a specific school site, disperse out so that you're pretty well distributed. And we'll come back in 25 minutes, okay?
It's a really, really good conversation, because just because I did an hour presentation and we think we get something, then applying it back doesn't always work that neatly. So I'm validating that. Some of the common themes, so I just kind of quickly checked in with Molly and Karen, some of the common themes that I wanted to spell. So again, it's receive versus have access to. Okay, so if everyone receives it, then it's a what?
Tier 1.
Correct. All right, so again, sometimes, you know, we're like a school resource officer. That's a good example. And this is where I give you guys a lot of kind of credit for recognizing, like, the school resource officer or a health aide. That's a really positive component to a campus. And students just even knowing that's there makes, and parents and staff, makes them feel more comfortable, makes them feel more safe. So that's kind of that school climate kind of cloud that circles all of this. But really, in general, students interact with the SRO in a formal way as what? What tier? Tier 2 or 3, depending, yes. So that's an example of why this can get meshy, right? And so wait, SRO, I thought it would be a tier 1 because he or she is available to everybody. Then it's get. So the services that an SRO would provide, per se, obviously he or she does the school safety plans and all that everybody benefits from. But in general, the services are more of a tier 2 or tier 3. The other thing that came up is mental health. Wait, so mental health, that's this. Wait, no, it's this. It's a tier 2, it's a tier 3. Again, just knowing that mental health is available. If I'm a student and I know that if I ever need help, I may never need it, but just knowing that I know where to go if I need it is huge for connection and for protective factors for that student. So that really positively impacts the school climate. However, students who access those services, if it's in a group or if it's in a special program that brings, you know, students together for a support or like a ropes course, right? Like, so a small group, right? That would be tier 2. Press.
I will
little light bulb went off. So if we had an assembly about social emotional support services at the school, to let the students know about what they are, i.e. like the red folder, our new, right? And they know what they need, that would be the tier 1. If the students ultimately access the service, it would then be the 2 or the 3.
So, not necessarily, because that's the marketing. Sorry, that's the marketing of the services available. That's that school climate part. That's all really, really positive, that students know where to go and they feel comfortable and they, oh, okay, she's really nice and if I would go to her, right? That's all, but I still may never talk to her in my 4 years, but it's just really nice that when I do break up and I'm devastated, that I know that that's an option, okay? So
So you're
again,
looking at the service as opposed to where it's coming from. The service is what you're identifying as tier 1, tier 2. So if I put up a poster, that's not any service.
right.
Therefore, that doesn't fit on my
Right.
calendar or on my tier 1, 2, or
Right.
3.
That's positive school climate, no bullying here, respect here, all those social messages are really, really positive for the school climate. Everyone sees it, but there's not a service per se, there's not a program, right, or an intervention.
I was just gonna ask Jenee, thinking about that same thing, does that come under staff development though, if you're introducing, say, the color
Yes.
or the green folder?
Yeah. So yes, thank you for clarifying, because your example where you said we're gonna talk about green folders and stuff, really the green folder is a resource for the staff to be able to access potential services for a student. So that staff is serving as the screener.
I was thinking of it more when we move, ultimately, I think the idea is we're gonna move to a student version, a staff version, and
Oh,
a
got it.
parent version.
Yeah.
But it was more, I was thinking if we have assemblies throughout the year, and one of them in particular, at the beginning of the year, introducing all the staff and all the support services, and then there's one that's more, it's still called the anti-bullying assembly, but it's really kind of turned more to, positive culture, social emotional health and well-being. And so in that assembly, there is actually some services being
Okay.
provided.
Yeah.
I would argue, because
Yeah.
I think students are being given, advice on how to, where to go, how to handle, what to do, I don't know.
And you're right, and so that's a perfect example where it's hard to just say yes or no, right? Because it really depends, I mean, when you say an assembly, it varies on what that assembly entails, so as an example, at my last campus, what we did is we did an assembly around suicide. Okay, so we had our mental health partners come in, they did an assembly around suicide, so every student got that assembly. That was a pretty intense service that student, they were understanding their own risk, they were understanding warning signs, they were thinking about their friends. And then students did an exit, and so we were able to screen the students that we needed to do in tier 2 and tier 3 work. But yes, on my list, we listed that as a tier 1 intervention. Okay, so that helps. The other thing that came up is people were like, well, where do I put an SST? Or where do I put a 504 or an IUP? Or we have a counseling group and the counselors screen the transcripts and then refer students that might need help. So those or historically we have thought of as interventions in our schools. They're not interventions. They're kind of mechanisms to access interventions. So an SST meeting is facilitated by a staff member, and in that meeting, interventions are determined. Same with a 504, same with a care team meeting. So oftentimes you guys are the personal human screener, right? You guys are going through the transcripts, you guys are looking at attendance data, you guys are looking at it and serving as a human screener to identify kids that may need tier 2s or tier 3s. But that intervention itself, that process itself is not an intervention. Does that make sense?
Judy, did you have a question?
Yeah, but let's say a student actually gets a 504 plan, then that would be an intervention, correct?
The interventions in the
To
plan
the plan.
are the interventions.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Jenee, I ask each group to just come back with maybe a comment, question,
Okay.
conclusion
Yeah.
from their activity. Can we just quickly
Please.
do that?
Yeah.
So Judy, did you want to start with your group? Like it was
Sure, okay.
it's just kind of a, not to put you on the spot, but.
Sure.
Well, it was very difficult to do in the time span that we had. But what we realized, one of the lessons learned was that we really need to look at tier 1. And that we realized that we don't have a whole lot in tier 1. And so we need to look at that. And I'm sure that there were some things that are missing up there, you know, because we were trying to move really quickly. But also there was a conversation about certain things. You know, people were like, well, is it, no, wait, is it a tier 2? Is it a tier 1? No, you know. And so we were able to have that kind of debate of like, where does it fall? So that was very helpful as well. And let's see, we have a lot of tier 2. So that's good, we feel good about that, and tier 3, but tier 1 is where we need to look at.
And at lunchtime, everyone can kind of circulate amongst this gallery we have now and kind of see what the other school sites have on their tiers. Shelley, did you want to talk about Carlmont?
Okay, well, like Judy, it opened up a great conversation, and we also recognize that Carlmont is doing a lot of collaborative efforts across the board. But we felt that this is such a valuable experience for us that we would like to open it up to more classified staff, because campus aides and people that are out there with the kids that could benefit from trainings and knowing how to work in those situations. What other things did you guys want to bring up?
I think she said we were kind of balanced across all 3 tiers. We
Yeah,
noticed that. We were surprised by that a little bit, because at first we had them in the wrong categories too, but once
Right.
we straightened it out, we noticed that we did have a pretty good balance.
Yeah, we were lucky to have Jenee with us first, so she could clarify a little bit, because there was a little confusion about it, but then once we had it clarified, and then what was good too is we came up with other resources and interventions that were not currently used. And does anybody remember any ones we added? Yeah,
Great.
we added them up there.
Francisco, did you want to talk about Woodside?
There was a couple things that were right there, and we noticed that we were very much tier 2 oriented, and that just had conversations on how to develop more tier 1, what that would look like in a school. I think the other discussions that we were having were related to, you know, where does something fall. I think a lot of ours were between tier 2 and tier 3, or that some services, or, you know, we had the actual program and felt like we can rip it in half, and they do some tier 2 and some tier 3, and so just kind of stuck there, but not a whole lot between tier 1 and tier 2. It was mostly between 2 and 3. And the other thing I think that we talked about is we had quite a large group here represented from Woodside, and we talked about just informing folks all the different supports we have, because some of the folks that were with us weren't really aware of some of the things that we offer, especially in the tier 2 group. And so just letting all folks know what we offer and how we can support students, because tier 2's mostly referral based, and if you don't know what it is, then you're not going to refer it. So we talked about that as well. Anything else I missed from our group?
Okay, great. Thanks, Francisco. And then Mickey, do you want to summarize?
We're over there in the corner. We moved things around, which I thought was good, kind of after we initially put them there, and then we had good conversations about and sort of hearing more of what the definition is being brought to us as 1, 2, and 3, because I think, I hope I'm not speaking for my whole, maybe I'm speaking for my whole team or not, but I think we're all in that mindset of what RTI tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 is, and to think about this differently was you know, we didn't get to that until sort of towards the end. So then we were like, oh, okay, now I see why it might go back to 1 or go to 3 or where it would go. So it really is having to have that mindset of that it's not an RTI tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but this MTSS sort of mindset. I think the other piece was, I think we actually have a pretty good amount of tier 1, but I think we always need more, because that does reach everybody. I think the folks that are here from MA are the folks doing more tier 2, tier 3 work. And so in our mindset, it was, you know, we're doing more individual stuff, And so we were also thinking more about like, should we do more tier 2, tier 3? Do we need more of these specialized programs? But then again, towards the end, it was like, oh, maybe we need more broad school stuff too, so that maybe kids don't need the 2 and the 3. Sort of looking at more preventative work. So I don't know, does anybody else want to add to that? MMA?
Great, thank you, Mickey. Thank you. Lori, you're already standing up. Let me.
Yeah, I'm already here. So, as you guys know, Redwood is a continuation high school, so it's a very different kind of setup. It's a small school, and it's sort of the highest need school, right? So, I was pleasantly surprised to see that we're doing a pretty decent job at the tier 1 of sort of serving a lot, all of our students, which is great because they all have that need. And then also in tier 2, there's a fair amount available, and then tapering down to tier 3. So I was pleasantly surprised to see it more or less looks the way we want it to look. One of the areas that I really want to focus on this spring is that area of universal screening, because I have the sense, I've only been there this fall, and I have the sense that like we were talking about, there are a lot of students that have a lot of needs that we are missing. And so we need to do a much better job. So in terms of the information that we're getting we're seeking from the home schools about the students who know them much better, and also from the students and parents themselves, really, in terms of self-reporting, what's going on with you, how have you gotten to Redwood, so that we can really look better at what they need to be successful. So that was the biggest takeaway. So that's our target for this spring. But we're blessed because it is a smaller school, and yes, it's a smaller step, but we're able to be more agile because of that. And so it's really, we can use that as a strength.
Great, thank you, Lori. Maria Jose?
Sure. So we are also a small school, and actually one of the things that I guess we struggle with is because we thought that more of our interventions were tier 1, and then we had to move into tier 2. Just because not everyone really accesses the service. So, for instance, like parent workshops, it's available for everyone, but really not all parents go to parent workshops, so we had to move that there. So I think that this is something that we need to keep in mind as we move forward, so that we can actually make more or have more interventions on tier 1, and have less of maybe support parents or students actually. Something else that I think that it's an important point related to what you said is like how we address kids that are coming in, and so maybe more of that communication with feeder schools, and so that we can address right away their needs, and again just like not having to just basically addressing in general the needs right away for the students and the families. That's all. I don't know if anyone else wants to address. I don't know, where's my group actually? I don't know what's either way. Anyways.
Great, thank you, MJ. So Jenee, maybe we'll just do a few concluding comments, and then we'll jump to the next section of doing cognito.
Okay, sounds good. So one, thank you all so much for going through that PowerPoint with me, hanging in there, shifting the mentality and the thoughts, and again, I just want to validate that it's kind of, us in the field, the science keeps shifting on us, right? And so we get trained in something, and then there's new definitions and there's new shifting, and so to take days like this to stay up to speed and for you to value that and come here, I really, really appreciate. And as the conversations that I heard in here, they're so rich and they're so important. And it was awesome to see people go, wait, what is that? What is that? And so just that informing and educating within the folks that are here makes me think about also the conversations that need to happen back. The other thing that I just want to say, in general, if you're a site with a lot of tier 2s, if you were to take the tier 2s and go as a team, who is this intended for? What is the issue that's trying to be addressed, academic or behavioral? Is there something we could be doing at tier 1 to be more preventative and proactive, and therefore we wouldn't need this tier 2? So that's a conversation to be thinking through. And sometimes it's like, yeah, it'd be really great if everyone in, everybody was doing Common Core, right? So sometimes it's like, yeah, it'd be really great if that group would fix this, right? And so that's why we're trying to get this across the district. And so we recognize that you guys don't have the ability, the influence, the power to fix everything on your campus, but the things that you do this work is really important, and to spend the time today to get it kind of thoughtfully, considered. And then if something's in a tier 2 that you know you actually could fix in a tier 1, but you're not there yet, that's something that your team can work on as a longer term, vision or goal. Or maybe that's consistent across the district, and then we come back and explore possible options and solutions. So thank you all for that. The other thing is, and Mickey had a good point, she and I had a little sidebar, that again, remember the very, very beginning when I talked about community resources, that the fact is you guys are in the field, on the campus doing the best you can to meet the social, emotional, and behavioral support of students. And then they go home, and then they have weekends, and they have families, right? And they have a lot of other players in their life. So you guys can be doing the amazing work you are doing, and there's a lot of other partners that we're excited to get to the table so that the coordination and the collaboration is much more consistent. So that you're not in it alone, because when they're not here, there's other folks that are touching them, and oftentimes we don't know it. Because again, back to that beginning statement that I said earlier, oftentimes we don't know how we can share information. Well, it's really valuable to know if that's, and sometimes it's like, yeah, it'd be really great if everyone in, everybody was doing Common Core, right? So sometimes it's like, yeah, it'd be really great if that group would fix this, right? And so that's why we're trying to get this across the district, and so we recognize that you guys don't have the ability, the influence, the power to fix everything on your campus, but the things that you do, this work is really important, and to spend the time today to get it kind of thoughtfully, considered. And then if something's in a tier 2 that you know you actually could fix in a tier 1, but you're not there yet, that's something that your team can work on as a longer term, vision or goal. Or maybe that's consistent across the district, and then we come back and explore possible options and solutions. So thank you all for that. The other thing is, and Mickey had a good point, she and I had a little sidebar, that again, remember the very, very beginning when I talked about community resources, that the fact is you guys are in the field, on the campus doing the best you can to meet the social, emotional, and behavioral support of students. And then they go home, and then they have weekends, and they have families, right? And they have a lot of other players in their life. So you guys can be doing the amazing work you are doing, and there's a lot of other partners that we're excited to get to the table so that the coordination and the collaboration is much more consistent. So that you're not in it alone, because when they're not here, there's other folks that are touching them, and oftentimes we don't know it. Because again, back to that beginning statement that I said earlier, oftentimes we don't know how we can share information. Well, it's really valuable to know if that student's on a diversion contract or being seen at the clinic, right? And so if we can get information sharing and those types of relationships built, that will also help support the work at the school site. So thank you. It's been a pleasure being here, and I appreciate the work, and I look forward to the journey ahead.